Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GeekNarrator podcast. I am your host, Kaivalya Apte, and I'm back with another very interesting episode. Today, I have Anjul Sahu with me, who is the founder and CEO of a company called Cloudraft, and he's working from Indore. He's from Indore, which is my native place. So, I'm really excited to talk about Kubernetes and mainly the trends around Kubernetes, a little bit about the history, like why Kubernetes has become what it is today, and more importantly, how Kubernetes looks like in today's world for different types of companies, for different types of individuals. Should you learn Kubernetes? Should you adopt Kubernetes? What is the ecosystem around it? And we are also going to cover some of the alternatives that we have that might be better for your use case than adopting Kubernetes. So, welcome, Anjul, and thanks a lot for joining this episode. I'm really excited to learn from you about the trends and what's going on with Kubernetes. So, let's start with a little bit of introduction for our viewers.
Thanks, Kevalia, for the introduction. So let me introduce myself a little bit. I started my journey with Kubernetes in 2018, and that's when I first got into learned about Kubernetes because my manager asked me to try it in our project. And then I fortunately joined Container Camp Australia, where I actually got interacted with a lot of the key folks in the community where I learned about what is happening in Kubernetes, and that gave me a very wide idea what it is a quite large project where I can build my whole career. So since then, I started diving deeper into Kubernetes, and I continued till now. Like when I started my own company in December 2022, our company is mainly focusing on cloud native consulting, Kubernetes consulting, and all the projects which are evolving around Kubernetes. So we are helping companies to use this technology to improve their developer experience, to scale their operations. And yeah, these are the use cases. We will also discuss further how it has been evolved and what are the latest things happening in this technology currently. Yeah, so that's about me.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks. And like folks who are listening in, if you have anything to do with cloud native technologies and you need some help, some consultation there, so feel free to reach out to Anjul and to check out Cloudraft. Anjul, I want to start with a little bit of history just to set some background, right? Like, where is Kubernetes coming from? Why
Okay.
is it reached this level of adoption and the fame that it has in the current world? So, let's talk a little bit about that, and then we can start digging deep into what is Kubernetes and how it works and all that.
My background, like I started as an infrastructure engineer, and in 2013 there was a lot of talks about Docker, and the technology was really coming everywhere, like democratizing, where everyone is trying to containerize their application. What I felt was the main reason for that was it was solving that problem where this code works on my computer and it doesn't work on another computer. So wanted to
Yeah.
make a portable wanted to bring that portability into the ecosystem so that the software delivery can be improved. That was number one reason where container came get a number one place in software delivery very
Hmm.
quickly. But eventually, what happened is when you were managing a lot of containers, there was a problem to orchestrate this thing effectively across multiple nodes and in the large ecosystem. At that time, there was Docker Swarm, which was created by Docker itself. But there were a lot of limitations in Docker Swarm around what can be done with the product. And at the same time, in 2014 and 15 timeframe, like Google open source this Kubernetes project, which was being used internally as a bot for a very long time to run all the Google applications like
Hmm.
Gmail and all major applications of Google. It was a very highly scalable around the world. Like they were able to cater the billions of users of Gmail, let's say. And then the same project, Borg, became Kubernetes, and it was donated to open source community.
Hmm.
And since then, people started using building on top of it. Right now, for example, there are over 7,000 major companies contributing to Kubernetes project and more than 75,000 developers participating in it on daily basis. So it is on second largest open source project right now in the ecosystem after Linux. So it has gained a lot of popularity and a lot of companies started adopting Kubernetes since then because of its extensibility. It makes it easy for end users to create their own applications around Kubernetes. A lot of companies are using as a base platform. So it really is very important project right now for majority of the cloud providers and large companies, Fortune 500 companies.
Yeah, definitely. When Google open sourced it, and it was so, as you mentioned, they used to have a system, or I guess even now they have a system called Borg, and it was a large system, and it was not very open sourceable. So because they had some very tightly coupled integrations and legacy code base there, so they created this Kubernetes and they made it extensible, and that's the most important point, right? Okay, it's open source, it's released by Google, but if it's not extensible, if I cannot use it to build on top of it, it's not going to gain the popularity, right?
Yeah.
So I guess, yeah, as you mentioned, that is the primary reason why it is so popular. And I didn't know it's the second largest open source project after Linux, so that's good to know. You mentioned a couple of benefits when it comes to the adoption, like it makes it easier for you to extend. You can build on top of it. It's like a platform. You get a lot of low level abstractions, which you don't need to understand, but you can work on top of it and manage your infrastructure very well. Let's dive a little deeper and understand the extensibility part, for example, right? Like when we say extensible, okay, it's a broad term, I know, at a high level, right? But are there any use cases where people have built something on top of Kubernetes that is really like useful?
If I have to give some example on top of Kubernetes, like for example, this is basically open API specifications where anyone can create their applications using that Kubernetes main fundamental structure, which is the API server, the scheduler, and the controller. Like
Hmm.
so, using these basic fundamental building blocks, you can create your own applications and use the power of Kubernetes features to
Hmm.
drive that. For example, a lot of platforms are being created. For example, if you want to launch a database PaaS service, let's say you are a PaaS provider, you can use Kubernetes to basically run your databases on, and you can or you can use the features like auto heal. You can extend you using integrate with the existing cloud players. You can automatically scale up, scale down. You can make it very highly distributed application, and you can offload the cross-cutting concerns of an application to Kubernetes, which can be very useful where you focus on your business logic
Hmm.
and rest of the things are taken care by the Kubernetes platform.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, as you mentioned, like there are like building blocks and you can combine them and create a different application. So it makes it easier for you to build applications quickly and to have those reliability or features that you really want any distributed system to have baked in without you having to implement it. So that's a
Yes.
good thing. What is your favorite feature of Kubernetes?
My favorite feature is like self-healing and this reliability features because that in the distributed system that is the most complex thing to implement by ourselves.
Hmm.
And if we get it magically by Kubernetes, that because of the declarative mechanism we define that I need two replicas of my application and it
Hmm.
automatically manage that and maintain that. So it is quite easy. In traditional infrastructure, you have to do a lot of stuff by yourself to do that. Yeah, so that's my best favorite feature.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about Kubernetes and some of the concepts that are really interesting. So, I don't have really extensive experience in Kubernetes. I've never worked at the infra level when Kubernetes was used, right? Like I was in the product teams and our infrastructure teams gave us the access to Kubernetes. And oh, here is how you can manage your clusters. Here you see your pods and your scaling. And this is a YAML file that this is how you can define the memory and the CPU and all that. So I know the basic stuff, but what are some must know features of Kubernetes for anyone who wants to understand in a little bit of depth what is happening?
So if I have to start with basics, like one is it is declarative in nature. For example, you specify in the YAML and manifest that this is my state, desired state. and it all the Kubernetes, the major part is like it is trying to match that desired state with the like actual state with the desired state. That is one thing quite important for anyone who is new to the Kubernetes to understand that this is the main thing behind the Kubernetes. Second thing is, for example, we a lot of things are driven by how you are scheduling this workload. This is again automatically managed by Kubernetes algorithm like scheduler, where to put this workload. You just
Mm.
define that I need a this much memory, this much CPU, and it automatically takes care that okay, I will find the correct node where I can fit this pod, and it happens. That is also something developers don't need to worry about. The another thing is there are a lot of internal mechanism like service discovery, DNS, how you are connecting from one service to another service. That has been quite simple, like it is abstracted using the services concept. Then finally, like the ecosystem is quite rich. For example, if you want to implement observability on your service, or if you want to implement CI/CD for the service, if you want to
Mm.
put service mesh on the service, this ecosystem is so huge. If you see the CNCF landscape, you will find ample amount of tools which can take care of that part. And your main focus is mainly on your business logic, and
Mm.
other things you can just plug and play with other pieces that are available in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
For example,
Yeah.
right now, if you are as a developer, you are worried about how I'm going to monitor my service,
Mm.
open telemetry project, and then there are a lot of observability projects happening inside Kubernetes ecosystem which can introduce observability at with minimum effort.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I would want to go a little deeper on that point when you said it's quick to implement, but a bit later when we talk about it. Let's talk a little bit about some of the problems that people face while, either learning Kubernetes or onboarding on Kubernetes. What are some common problems you have faced, or let's say people face?
Yeah, you are right. This was one of the conception like people had like initially that Kubernetes is a complex project. If I
Mm.
introduce it in my project, it will become a overhead. And it was actually the case in the initial days when this ecosystem was not that mature.
Yeah.
And maybe like I'm talking about 6, 7 years ago. But then the Kubernetes itself is matured because of high growth and interest from various companies.
Mm.
The intent is to improve the developer productivity here, like how developers
Yeah.
can quickly adopt to the Kubernetes. Other areas which
Yeah.
were very complex initially was like how to spin up the Kubernetes cluster itself. That was a major challenge,
Mm.
and I know how to manage it, how to manage the
Yeah.
day-to operations in Kubernetes. This was one of the key decision point like everyone had to go through, and they were avoiding Kubernetes because I don't want extra complexity in managing Kubernetes cluster. But nowadays what is happening, what I'm seeing is that Kubernetes community has tried to create various tools to simplify the processes, how you can
Mm.
run Kubernetes in your own machine. That has been simplified so much, like you can just write one command and within a minute you will get a cluster to work with. Also, all the major cloud providers have created the managed control plane, so it is quite easy to start a cluster nowadays. And usually, these kind of things are getting simplified further with more and more abstractions coming on top of the Kubernetes. So you don't need to worry about how I'm going to implement, for example, how I'm going to implement logging for my system, how I'm going to
Mm.
put observability for my system. So there are tools like, for example, if someone has to start trying with Kubernetes, they can try with a kind, which is a Kubernetes 6 CLI project where you just create cluster, and one small cluster will be ready on your machine within a minute.
Yeah.
And it is compliant with upstream Kubernetes. You are not missing anything as such.
Yeah.
Um, there are other even simpler solutions like K3s, K0s, which are very small binaries. You can try it on even your ARM systems like Raspberry Pi, and you can play around with it, and you can have a similar experience like a pure Kubernetes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I guess it's analogous to these Lego blocks where you have small Lego pieces here and there, and you just pick which ones you want. And then they fit in so well together that you can create like a new structure of your Lego blocks within minutes. And it's up to you. It's up to your what you need, and you can just fit in all the pieces together and build something new.
Yeah. So if you follow the current trends, like we are talking about a lot of platform engineering stuff, and if in that platform engineering also, Kubernetes has become the base platform, and everyone is using
Yeah.
Kubernetes,
Hmm.
where people are trying to create more abstractions on top of Kubernetes using this Lego blocks and
Hmm.
simplifying it. What developers has to do on top of it, they use these components created by platform teams, which
Hmm.
basically abstract the Kubernetes also
Yeah.
and how the things are coming up. And but underneath, like Kubernetes is a backbone of this products and this infrastructure layer.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I had to do some POC and I needed a Kafka cluster and all that. I was already given like a Kubernetes cluster to play with, but I wanted to have this Kafka and Zookeeper and whatnot. So it was fairly easy for me to integrate the different operators and work with them and just change some YAML properties just to make it work for my own use case. And it avoided all the noise I had to deal with if it was not Kubernetes, right? Like it gives me all the best practices followed up without thinking about them. It gives me an easy declarative way to define what I want, and I can mainly focus on my own stuff, which was great because that leads to early prototyping, early release to market, and all that. I want to talk a little bit more on that, but I believe that nothing comes for free and there's always a cost attached to it. So let's say there's all the good things attached with Kubernetes, but I adopt it, but there has to be some problems, some downsides to it, right?
Yeah.
What is in your view is the like the biggest downsides, or let's say top three downsides of adopting Kubernetes for anyone?
So one could be for the new user, it might be very overwhelming stuff because the ecosystem looks quite large, and you will feel which component of which Lego blocks I have to pick up from this to create my own platform, or what should I
Hmm.
use first. So
Interesting.
that is one of the major thing which can prevent new user to adopt to Kubernetes. That what should I use first.
Okay.
Second thing is there is a bit of learning curve, obviously, because you need to understand the Kubernetes architecture, the Kubernetes manifest, how to deploy these things. This varies from in which phase of your maturity, like company has been in. It depends like what how much time you want to invest, how big is your software team, how large is that team, how and how many services you have. That is also one factor where you need to decide whether I need that much
Yeah.
complexity in my system. But yeah, once you start putting effort in this building this platform, you will see the benefits of it, where it reduces your go to market time, and it will increase agility. It will also give you guardrails that this is how I should create a service, this is how I should deploy the service.
Hmm.
That will all come, but it takes some time. So once you spend that time, it will be easy for you to work
Yeah.
with Kubernetes.
Interesting. Yeah. So the initial learning curve and the illusion or the appearance of Kubernetes that might sound overwhelming or look overwhelming that, oh, what are these new concepts? And should I be even focusing on this because I have some other core problems to solve and features to release? So that could be one thing. But as you mentioned, if you put in some effort initially, I think it will get easier and easier given the extensibility and the integration it has with the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So yeah, that could be a problem. Expanding on this, right? There are multiple types of companies that want to work on their core product, but they face issues like the availability and the reliability of the product, and they don't have, let's say, expertise in managing this. So I want to talk about these, let's say, three broader classes of companies like startups, scale ups, and the enterprises. And if they have to, of course there's no clear answer because it depends on the context, but let's say they have to follow some recommendation on, for a startup, should they try to adopt Kubernetes, what should be the
Okay.
points that they should look at before doing
Okay.
that?
Okay. Based on my experience over 15 years, I have started my journey with enterprises, and then I'm working with a lot of early stage startups now.
Mm.
From my experience, I can share some ideas of what you should see
Yeah.
first. So first of all, let's start from a journey of a company. So when you start with an early stage company, there will be very few people in your team. Let's say you will have 10 to 20 max people who are developers, pure developers. And the goal of early stage startup is typically to achieve the product market fit first,
Mm.
and then you can obviously then you will start thinking about scaling it from there. Initially, my recommendation is that you don't necessarily need Kubernetes if you don't have a lot of services and you don't have anyone in the team who understand the operations part and the platform parts. Then you can start with the some abstracted platforms on top of Kubernetes, which can be really easy to adopt within your team. So knowledge of team member and maturity of your team member is very important here. So based on that, you can decide that I want to take some tool like Heroku or some PaaS where I just containerize my application, deploy it, attach with some observability products, and set up some basic CI and start using it and see how it is going on and how my product is taking shape. So your more effort is going on the product instead of managing the
Mm.
platform. Uh, Once you have identified, okay, this product is growing and this I need to scale it up, then Kubernetes is something you should introduce because that will start reducing your costs and make it. And also, when your team is growing from, let's say, about 20 people, you need to organize it better. How team is planning to introduce new services, there needs to be a guided path for which is called golden path nowadays. So they need a
Yeah.
golden path how to deploy the services. They need to release faster. They need to have this features of Kubernetes like auto scalable, making it auto scalable and making it reliable, making it highly scalable. That's where you will start hiring probably some platform engineer who can introduce this for you. And
Mm.
then the thing is that everyone in the team needs to understand the platform also a little bit. So it's a good idea to introduce Kubernetes to all the key stakeholders of your
Mm.
team so that they can manage their services by themselves. And then obviously once you are like a scale up, you have to keep adding new features into this platform, try to reduce the ops overhead, make it easy for developers so that they don't feel the friction of taking their service to Kubernetes. That becomes very important then, and that's where platform engineering also comes in, where you will start thinking how I can make it very easy for a developer to onboard on this platform and how
Mm.
he or she will bring the new service in this platform. And later on, if I talk about enterprises like have a lot of energy in this to spend time on building that whole very solid ecosystem. And a lot of enterprises are also using multiple clouds nowadays. So
Yeah.
Kubernetes can become that layer where it abstract all the clouds and you work in the same language with every cloud provider. It has become a very important platform where it will allow you to adopt the multi-cloud strategy faster.
Yeah.
And moreover, like the for enterprises, the major thing is like security, how you are doing the cost optimization, department wise cost management. There are a lot of projects within Kubernetes which can make it easy for you to do this. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think it's a journey. You have to start from somewhere once you have achieved product market fit. You start with this journey and make it better with your scale.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess those are good recommendations, and people should try to understand the context they are working in and if that makes sense. Because adopting Kubernetes, the idea of adopting Kubernetes sounds all like good, and it's really good if you're able to do that. But it might impact your hiring decisions, your product decisions, and how you spend money on what and all that. So it depends on what kind of company you're working at. But yeah, Kubernetes has got its own advantages, and it comes at a slightly bit of a learning curve, but it gets easier over the time given it has a wide supported ecosystem. This sounds good. And let's say So there is Kubernetes, and let's say there's some kind of restriction, somehow. Like I'm working with a client who doesn't like Kubernetes, or they don't want to invest in something like Kubernetes. What are the alternatives? Do I have alternatives to Kubernetes, and should I even look at them?
There are many alternatives. For example, HashiCorp has a project called Nomad. Some companies are using Nomad to do the similar thing, but it is not that extensible and it is also not
Yeah,
completely grown like Kubernetes, like it is not that adopted by a community. So
yeah,
the ecosystem might be poor, and also there is also a learning curve because the tool also expects some DSL to be learned, like that domain specific language that you need to learn. There was Mesos, but it is not used nowadays. It was long time ago. Now, in if you have to think about some other products, it's like either you go for a managed PaaS platform which are built on top of Kubernetes. Like for example, there are a lot of platforms available. Like for if I have to talk, or some non-Kubernetes platform also. Like for example, Render is one of them. Fly.io is
mm,
there. So this kind of platforms, what they do is they allow you to simplify how developers are deploying the applications, and you don't need to worry about the CI and CD part also, and you don't need to manage the servers.
interesting,
So the platform makes it easy for you to start quickly and scale, and their pricing is also quite appealing to young startups. But only I think once you grow from that early stage to scale ups and enterprise, then you might have to think about whether that pricing is working for you or not at that scale.
interesting. Yeah, that does make sense, and people are free to look at the alternatives of Kubernetes depending on what they want out of Kubernetes or the other product that they want to use. And it's really good that you have these options and you can pick and choose and whatever works for you. As you mentioned, there's on top of Kubernetes or tools like that, there's also managed services. So you just don't do anything, you just use that and get rid of all the platform engineering stuff that you are not expert at, and then focus on building the actual product. This is cool. And so we have shared some recommendations on startup scale ups, different size of companies. Have you seen someone fail at adoption of Kubernetes, or what are some of the core reasons why people would fail at Kubernetes if they want to adopt it? If there are any failure
Okay.
stories you want to share.
So it is from my experience only what I have seen, like in one of the large telco enterprise project. They started with Kubernetes. We spent almost 1 year implementing the project, and later on they found it very complex because it was, I'm talking about somewhere around 2018-19. That time
Mm,
the people were not aware of Kubernetes that much. We didn't have a lot of
yeah.
skills in the team. People were creating friction to adopt to that. I don't want to use Kubernetes because I don't know
Mm,
Kubernetes. And that was one of the major problem where we wanted them to use Kubernetes, but it was not working for us.
yeah.
Second thing is Kubernetes, because it is open source project and there are a lot of changes happening very fast. And we are building using various Lego parts, right? So there are possibilities of a lot of bugs also, which can introduce and which can block your work. And instead of working on product, you might end up fixing those bugs, and that may take up your time. So in initial days, that was one of the major problem where we were trying with open source projects and a lot of bugs we were getting. And but there is obviously the community is quite large, so you will and get a fix. But because there is no one company responsible for that, so it might take long time for you to fix that bug. So this can be a showstopper in some companies where you have adopted to some open source project and it is not working for you. That may require some additional commercial consulting or some player to, or you use some commercial product to fix it, where you will get more attention. It's
Mm,
not actually a Kubernetes problem, but it is because
yeah.
of the nature of the building blocks we are using and the open source components involved. Some projects are slow, some projects are faster. So you will get a varied support.
Okay.
That's one important thing. And also in enterprises, I've seen they don't adopt open source as easy as commercial products. So
Yeah.
if I want to start with open source journey there, You will hit a lot of security roadblocks. There will be a lot of approvals you have to take. So it may make it actually slower than other
Yeah.
products. That was one of the problem I saw initially to make it productionized for. And but this has been changed little bit now. Like people are aware of a lot of these open source
Yeah.
projects, and the project also has been matured enough, and there are a lot of consulting companies around the world who understand
Hmm.
this very deep, who can provide you support if required.
Yeah, that makes sense. The point that you made for enterprises, that's so true. And I've seen it multiple times that there's a good intention to adopt Kubernetes at large scale, at enterprise scale. But then there are so many approvals that, oh, you know what, this is a operator which may not be very well suited for our use case, and it may not be compliant, and you need to change it. So you end up doing a lot of stuff before even adopting Kubernetes, and that creates a little bit of friction, which makes sense for enterprises, right? Because they have the workforce, they have the time and money to invest on such kind of infrastructure. But then at startups, they don't have time and money, but they don't have such compliance issues anyways most of the time. So it makes sense. And so I guess the point is Kubernetes can feel like it's a bit overwhelming at the beginning, but I guess someone has to keep pushing and understanding the ecosystem and make use of it for the best of their own product.
Yes, yes. So
Cool.
adoption has become easier, as I said, and you have support of community. The community is quite large enough. You can reach out to them on Kubernetes Slack channel, CNCF Slack channel, Reddit. There are a lot of places where they are there, right?
Mm.
You can, because it also open source. If you have time and energy, you can jump into the project itself and fix it yourself and share with the community. So that is possible if you have time.
Okay. Perfect. I have one last question before we end this amazing session. So I got asked by a lot of developers who are new to the industry. They are still learning, and even I had the same question. I still have the same question. Should I be learning Kubernetes? Is it the right time to jump on the boat and learn Kubernetes and add that to my skill? And the second part to this question is, if yes, then how? What is a good way or one of the best ways to learn Kubernetes?
Okay. So if we are talking about now in 2023, we are already late in the game, right? Like it's a 10-year-old project. Most of the companies are using it, as I said in the conversation. So you should learn Kubernetes. It will be helpful in your career. Like you will see that somewhere you are using Kubernetes in some company, if not current company. Moreover, you can actually, once you know the Kubernetes ecosystem, you might end up become an advocate and you might introduce it in your company also, because there are benefits obviously of using Kubernetes. The only challenge we discussed was to adopt because of learning curve, little bit of learning curve. If you cross that learning curve, there are ample features that you will get that you cannot get it in other projects. To learn Kubernetes, there are knowledge. There are a lot of YouTube channels you can see. There is a course from Shad Manabeth on Code Cloud which you can take. It's one of the easiest course I've seen, which tells you about all the basic things, and that can be a good starting point. There are the Kubernetes documentation itself is a very good place to start, where they have tried to make it so easy for a new beginner to start. Other things you should try is, because now, as I said, we can start Kubernetes cluster very quickly in your machine. It is available for all type of architectures. So start with a basic cluster. Don't spend a lot of time on understanding
Mm.
the cluster, how to create that cluster, but start with the cluster. Try to move your applications, existing applications, into the Kubernetes. Learn from
Mm.
top down approach. Try to see what are the various components within the Kubernetes that is given to the developers, which you can use. Try those primitives, and then if you want to go into the offside, you can then start thinking about trying with some tools like KubeADM to start create a couple of VMs in your local system and spin up the cluster by yourself. That will give you idea how it works behind the scene. And there are hard ways also, like there is a good GitHub repository like Kubernetes the hard way by Kelsey. You can try that as well and try to understand the each and every point of Kubernetes, how it works and how it is created. That is recommended for admins or ops people, I would
Yeah.
suggest, because I don't want to scare you as a beginner that you go and start working with the Linux things that that you probably won't be using in your day-to-day developer workflow.
Awesome.
And also learn about how easy you can make it for developers to deploy the applications on Kubernetes, because that is the most important part once the cluster is created. How
Hmm.
to scaffold your application, how to productionize your application, what are the best practices around that. That should be a point you should take in learning.
Absolutely. Cool. Yeah. Thanks a lot, Anjul, for sharing all the practical recommendations from the world of Kubernetes. And I definitely have a better perspective and better view on what's going on in Kubernetes and what's it all about. So thanks a lot for sharing that experience. I'm sure it will help the viewers understand why and when of Kubernetes and what of Kubernetes. Definitely, there is ton of resources on the internet, as you mentioned. And for our viewers, feel free to check out Cloudraft if you need any cloud based consulting. Anjul has a vast experience working with different companies, working at different companies, and solving a lot of different problems. So do reach out to him and also do check out his blog. Where are you writing the blogs these days? Where can people follow you?
So I write it on Medium, and I also have my own website, anjul.dev, where I share my articles. I also have a newsletter, anjulsahu.substack.com, where I
Hmm.
try to share what is happening in the cloud native industry every week. So you can subscribe to that newsletter, and you will get to know what are the new projects, what is the news in this cloud native industry. So slowly you will learn and get more idea about this ecosystem.
Cool. Yeah, definitely do give a follow and take a look. And last but not the least, do like this episode if you like the content and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to share it with your friends so everyone can learn together. And yeah, until next episode, thank you and keep learning.
So thanks, Cavalier, for this awesome session. Thank you.